This is a panel on the wisdom of experience. And I've learned, as the host of a weekly radio program produced by AARP with a focus of people 50 and older, their parents and their children, it's called Primetime Radio, that the subject of what to do with life after 50 often comes up. Oddly enough, even in a discussion of marriage in the later years, it emerges that couples want more than golf and travel. They want to feel as if they're continuing to do something important. Maggie Scarf, in her new book on marriage in later years, quotes the plaintive question upon retirement from a husband, "Who am I absent my career?" It may be an attempt to find a new identity about a career that's leading so many 50-plus Americans to indicate they want to give something back. A new report the AARP commissioned on the willingness of the 50-plus population to give back will be discussed this afternoon, since John Bridgman of the Civic Enterprises is with us, and his group conducted the survey. I'd like to point out that what to me was the most significant finding of the report: a majority of 50-plus Americans want to volunteer, but nearly 7 in 10 non-volunteers report they've never been asked to serve. That's nearly 70% who've not been reached by the organizations you're going to hear from today, and from others, of course. Part of our purpose in this panel is to give you an idea as to what is being done to reach that 70% and what the remaining barriers are to getting fuller participation. I've not talked with all of our panel members yet, but I suspect none of them is reporting a problem of too many volunteers. In the belief that what they are doing now and planning to do in the future is more important to them than what they have already done, I'll simply introduce our panel for identification's sake without biographies, and because we're short of time anyway. Suffice to say, all are more than qualified by experience and wisdom to do the jobs they're doing. John Bridgman, I already mentioned, President and CEO of Civic Enterprises. Pete Garcia, President of the Victoria Foundation. Garo LaMarche, President and CEO of the Atlantic Philanthropies. Tom Nelson, Chief Operating Officer of AARP. And Michelle Nunn, CEO of the Points of Light Network and Hands-On Network. Each of our panelists will focus on their particular efforts to engage the 50-plus volunteers. I'll act as inquisitor for just a few minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end from you. We start then with John Bridgman of Civic Enterprises. John?
Thanks a lot, Mike. Welcome, everyone. I'll be brief like Vartan this morning, who I guess published this wonderfully rich and longer speech that we can read in a handout. We actually did a report commissioned by AARP that was released just a couple of days ago. Tom and I did a bit of a media tour, and the good news was Americans all over the country were calling in for more information. I think what epitomizes to me the lost opportunity, and I'll say I don't think our country has done a very good job in harnessing the capacity and the power of our plus 50 Americans to serve. I think we've done a wonderful job actually in enlisting young people, whether it's through the Civilian Conservation Corps, 3+ million young jobless men, the Peace Corps, the call to service. Although John Kennedy said, I call on all Americans, young and old. It was primarily the Peace Corps was for younger people, and AmeriCorps has continued that tradition. Francis Collins, had this wonderful experience the other night where the AARP, in a powerful moment every year, gives one of its Ethel Percy Andrus Service Awards to an outstanding American who has literally changed the American landscape with their service and innovation, and had the privilege of listening to Francis Collins, who was the director of the Human Genome Project, who decoded with scientists around the world 20,000 of our DNA. And what was striking to me about it, though, after he played 2 folk songs on his guitar to engage the audience, was that he said, I'm now retired from the Human Genome Project, and I'm not quite sure what to do with my skills. And I think there are millions of Americans all across this country who are have extraordinary gifts that we could put to use. But we set out to find out. AARP commissioned a report, and Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone, and Harris Wofford, who helped co-found the Peace Corps, and we as representatives of 3 generations, baby boomers, silent, and greatest generation members, conducted a survey, nationally representative, to find out the civic attitudes and behaviors of Americans over 50. Very briefly, because you can read it in here, what we found that was striking to me: a majority of older Americans believe, and the age group was 44 to 79, believe that they're leaving the world in much worse condition than they inherited it from their parents. And their parents, of course, were the members of the greatest generation. Interestingly, though, 4 in 10, about 45 million Americans are ready to increase their volunteer service, which largely matched the number of older Americans who increase that service when they retire. A vast majority are healthy, free of caregiving commitments, kind of debunking mythology that as we age, it's all about decline. Read this wonderful book, Younger Next Year, and people like Harris Wofford and Mort Kaplan, who I have lunch with every month with John Kennedy's IRS commissioner, is 94 and fought at the Battle of Normandy and goes into work every day and has a vital life civically, are great examples to how we can harness that capacity. In this little report, we outline the not just the attitudes and behaviors, but the motivations and the barriers for older Americans being engaged. And then we come forward, consistent with the ServiceNation Summit, which is an action forcing summit, with a 12-point plan or set of ideas, from creating a civic highway that might be a meetup or a Facebook for 50-plus Americans. More than 66% of older Americans are on the internet, use it regularly. They cite a lack of information on volunteer opportunities as one key barrier to not being engaged, all the way to, encouragingly, already what Senator Kennedy and Hatch have included in their legislation, and then the missing pieces. Thank you, AARP, were actually announced by Senator Dodd at the plenary session. So I think on the national level, we're going to be in pretty good shape in terms of creating more opportunities for older Americans to serve.
Thank you, John. Pete Garcia, Victoria Foundation.
Thank you. The Victoria Foundation is an effort, the first community-based community foundation incorporated in the United States under a community development corporation, and our efforts are aimed strictly at trying to get the Latino community involved in philanthropy and service to our community. As our population continues to gray, and you can see my hair, we used to be black when I started doing this kind of work 35 years ago. We now have to focus on that we have been discovered. Now that people say there's about 42 million of us, a huge number of the population that will be doing some of this volunteering and some of the work that needs to be done in our communities are Latinos. And this is an effort by the Victoria Foundation to start to harness that energy, that economic maturity that our community has started to reach as far as income, expendable resources that they can use to address some of the issues in our community. And the Victoria Foundation is principally centered in working in economic development and affordable housing, arts and culture, education and scholarships, and foreign exchange and community-based programs. So what we've done is incorporated a community-based foundation that is building a basis of donor-advised funders, building a corpus that we want to grow that would be able to be used by the community, and making grants to small nonprofits, micro grants, and trying to build some of the efforts that need to be done in our community along those areas that I mentioned. And this foundation, in its infancy, is just starting, and we're looking forward to addressing the issues in our community and getting more seniors involved. What we've done in the past is we've used foster grandparents. In my previous life, before I retired in December, we built 7 elderly housing projects in different urban and rural environments. We used foster grandparents in teen pregnancy programs. We used them for home health aides, chore services, companion programs, tutors in schools. We used in one of the school programs that we used in one of the cities that's adjacent to Phoenix. The Victoria Foundation is in Arizona, and hopefully as we grow the foundation, we would like to be a regional foundation in the Southwest. And we've used, in one of these neighboring cities to Phoenix, we've used grandparents as padrinos and madrinas that act as tutors, teachers, and go and have lunch with children in these inner city schools in this small town next to Phoenix, Tempe. and in some instances, they even act as truant officers. And where we've used these grandparents, the grades have gone up, the issues of violence and other misconduct has gone down. So there is a big need to use seniors in different programs, and we've been very successful over the last 35 years of using seniors to do some of this work. We've used Title V workers as food service. We do Meals on Wheels. We provide congregate meals at several sites, and we've used volunteers to do some of the work that needs to be done in those areas. Another area we've used them as teachers, GED, trying to teach young people to get through school. So we've been able to use these seniors. One of the things that we've always taken a look at is the impediments to participation as a volunteer. Many of the Latino community do not have pensions, railroad pensions, stocks and bonds. So when they're being asked to volunteer, they come from a background that in some instances there needs to be a way to assist them so they can volunteer. And be it, there is an impediment for language, an impediment of economic status, and possibly mobility. So the Victoria Foundation is centered in trying to assist our community to address some of the issues that need to be addressed in Arizona. And that's the work that we're doing in Arizona over the next few years.
Gary LaMarche of Atlantic Philanthropies.
Thank you very much, Mike. Atlantic Philanthropies is an organization that gives out money, so we don't use volunteers in the same way as some of the other panelists. Although we often have a lot of people volunteering to help us spend the $4 billion. That's kind of a different kind of volunteerism. And when you have, I was joking with John Bridgeland at the beginning of the panel, 5 people, all of whom are on the same wavelength, urging the same things. When you're in the middle, you just lost half your speech. So luckily, I'm not Michelle, because she gets left with nothing to say. But some of the stuff I was going to talk about with respect to barriers has been much more eloquently addressed by Pete. So let me say a couple of things. Atlantic is a foundation that has as one of its primary focus areas in the U.S. and around the world aging. And within that focus on aging, we have been for several years now quite devoted to supporting various forms of what we've been calling civic engagement of older people, of older adults. And we just came from a convening this week in Tarrytown of all of our grantees in those areas, and many who are not grantees, to talk about the future of that field, even indeed the extent to which it is a field. And civic engagement is a insufficient term to describe it all, but it's a beginning, and it'll morph into something else in time. But among the things we're trying to do is recognize, it's based upon an awareness that the demographics of this society are changing rapidly, and that you have a huge number, many millions, 78 million among the so-called baby boomers alone, who are well past what would have traditionally been considered a normal retirement age, want to work, want to serve, have a lot to contribute, are an enormous, insufficiently tapped asset in this society. And what we're trying to do fundamentally with the many grantees and partners that we have is change the paradigm really, from a model of being older as a kind of a deficit, the so-called greedy geezer, to an enormous asset for this society that can be turned and mobilized to work on the deepest and most fundamental and important problems and challenges that the society has. And I think I just want to take a second to say that it's enormously gratifying, and I think an important milestone in the development of that awareness, that this very important summit, the ServiceNation Summit, which is brought together under the leadership of a lot of terrific political and civic leaders, a call to action in the United States for service, that the role of older adults has been front and center in this, beginning with the sponsorship of the ARP and the report that's being released today, and also recognizing, in this very panel, I don't think that would have been the case, frankly, 5 or 10 years ago. So it suggests an awareness and a movement in the culture that's very, very welcome. So beyond that, I guess I wanted to say, Yes, that we have to recognize that there's this enormous potential, but also there are barriers. Some of those barriers are systemic and structural. How can people be matched to the opportunities that exist? Volunteer Match has expanded its work to be much more useful to older adults, and we need more of the connecting and the matching opportunities. We need nonprofits to be particularly attentive to the needs and interests of older adults. We need to recognize that there are cultural and community-based barriers, so that some people have economic barriers, transportation barriers, caregiving needs of their own. There are all kinds of things that have to be dealt with and recognized by nonprofits and through public policy. We need to lift up the models that we have of successful involvement by older adults. So we have been big and proud supporters, along with the Templeton Foundation, of the Purpose Prize that Civic Ventures has been running, which is to identify from many more worthy applicants that could possibly be recognized with money, older adults who are embodying innovation in serving deep social needs, you know. So one of the things that lifts up is that older people throughout their lives, including, I think I heard just the other day, that a 93-year-old person is in the running for one of them now, ideas that are innovative and new, that older people have not only experience to contribute, which makes them different in many respects from people at the younger end of the spectrum, but also new ideas all the time, that innovation is not the province of the young or people who happen to be living in Silicon Valley. There are many other models that we fund and support and that I could name. Experience Corps is probably the other one that I'd want to, you know, just toss out there, which is a terrific program that takes retired, often civil servants, people who've been in social welfare agencies or civil service of various kinds, and who want, and many of whom are people of color in urban areas, and who want to work in their local schools and mentor and tutor first, second, third graders, help raise their reading scores. We've just had a fairly rigorous evaluation of this, and it is making a very big difference in some schools that have been very tough to have succeed, and with kids who really could use the help and benefit from the help. And at the same time, of course, it's a form of engagement by older people that has another tremendous social and personal value as well. So models like the Experience Corps need to be lifted up. I guess the final thing I would say, because we don't have that much time, and there's a lot of rich material all across the spectrum up here, is that in spirit of the summit, let me just say that both of the presidential candidates, as far as I have been able to tell, are committed to and have committed themselves to calling the nation to greater heights of service and to mobilizing all the people who want to serve. And I think that it's encouraging that there's some receptivity to the particular opportunities and needs of older adults. Public policy will have to follow that. We will have to make sure that there's tuition assistance for people who want to go to community colleges and learn new skills to be able to work. We have to recognize the fact that many people will need to have continuing medical coverage of some kind. We need to provide more funds for demonstration and complete funding of successful models. All of that, I've written about this in Democracy Journal a couple of months ago, could be embodied in a third age bill by the next president of the United States, whoever that happens to be, so that public policy follows the tremendous energy and initiative that's been unleashed in the last couple of years in terms of connecting older adults to the service of the needs of this society and of the planet. So, thank you.
Tom Nelson from AARP.
Okay, well, good afternoon. We are an organization that is very much all about volunteers. We were founded by a volunteer. We are governed by a board of directors made up of volunteers, and we literally have hundreds of thousands of volunteers working in the name of AARP. And this year we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. And the line that we use all the time is that we're finally old enough to join ourselves. So this is a good thing. That letter that so many people dread will be coming to AARP. But in this, our celebratory year for our 50th, we are really all about rededicating what is, in fact, very much who we are and a fundamental value, and that is the power of the over 50 population. We have, as I think has been referenced earlier, a motto in the organization that was given to us by our founder: to serve, not to be served. And so this is really very much who we are as an organization. And I'd hold up very quickly 3 examples, not particularly because they're specific to AARP, but because I think they are models of what we can do together. And the first is one of the programs that we run that is of long standing. It is where we run tax counseling to low-income seniors. And what's important about it is this is a program that's delivered in partnership with the Internal Revenue Service. So we very much believe if we're going to be successful, it's about working together. But what's also important is it is delivered by over 30,000 volunteers with a staff of 10. So you want to talk about cost effectiveness, power. It is 10 staff, 30,000 volunteers servicing every year 2 million people and putting back in the pocket of low-income seniors this past year over $180 million in the earned income tax credit. So that shows you the return on the dollar for volunteer efforts. My second model, my second example is in the world of advocacy. If we're going to be successful in the Kennedy-Hatch legislation, absolutely we need the youth voice, but we also need the voice of the over 50 population. In the last midterm election, over half of the voters were voters over age 50. And 1/4 of those voters were AARP members. So we need to be communicating, we need to generate the enthusiasm, the commitment from the over 50 population in service and in advocacy on behalf of service. And my last example is work that we've done through the National Retired Teachers Organization, where one of the huge challenges we deal in this country's schools is teacher dropout, is the fact that within the first year of teaching, half of those first-year teachers leave the profession. Well, we have taken retired teachers, and as volunteers, they have gone back into the school system as mentors to work with those first-year teachers, and we've got quantifiable results that shows with that kind of mentoring from an experienced teacher, those first-year teachers will stay in the school system at a much, much higher rate. So I think those are 3 examples of 3 different dimensions about how work can be done to help seniors, work can be done by the older population in terms of advocacy, but also work can be done to serve the needs of the younger generation. And that's actually what we found in the research that Bridge was a leader on, that the top 2 areas of interest for the over 45 population in terms of service and volunteering is 1, working with youth, and at the same level, helping other older people stay independent in the community, helping their neighbors stay independent. Top 2 areas of interest. I want to end with laying out what I see as 4 challenges, what we see as 4 challenges. The first, despite the fact that we clearly have made progress by having this panel, having this opportunity to involve the over 50 population very much front and center in this meeting, make no mistake, seeing the over 50 population as an asset, not a burden, is still a challenge we have to step up to. It is way too common to see aging as being all about decline, not about living and opportunity, and that's a message that we have to convey. I think, frankly, that is particularly prominent. This is my second challenge in the context of the not-for-profit sector. We really do need to work with the infrastructure to help them see the potential that the over 50 population has in solving some of this country's toughest issues. The third challenge is, I think, the need to use technology, new channels. That's not unique just to the younger population. We have got to be much more aggressive about putting the ask and the opportunities on the web. We have to create more flexibility. So new ways to involve and communicate with people is not just for the younger population, it's for the older population as well. And finally, and it seems quite simple, but I think it's a barrier, is to really come up with new language. Frankly, we've done a fair amount of research, and with all respect, volunteering and service is not what resonates with people. And I hate to say this, but even the idea of joining a movement doesn't really resonate with people. It's about making a difference in their community, helping their neighbors. The language we're using is, it's about creating the good. Create the good. People want that kind of aspirational language that means something to them right there in their hometowns and their neighborhoods. And frankly, that's what together I think we can step up to. Great, thank you.
Michelle Nunn, Points of Light Foundation and Hands-On Network.
Great. So, Gary, you predicted accurately. So now I have very little left to say after a very robust panel set of presentations. I will say that I think that it is terribly exciting to be at this table with this conversation, despite a little bit of mixed feelings I have that I used to be in the youth table. But this is my first full entry into, I think, the invitation to the AARP community as an individual. And I just want to say, too, I think AARP's involvement and leadership in this summit is absolutely key and pivotal in terms of the coming together. So just a few reflections. One is that I think, interestingly, as Tom talked about some of the challenges, when you think about what will it take for us to really capture the opportunity that is so clearly possible in this 50-plus age bracket. Interestingly, I think that the reinventions and the reengineering and the reimagining that needs to take place in the civic space in order for us to capitalize upon this population will also serve all the populations well. Because while there are unique needs and interests from this community, many of them are also applicable to the general population. So when you think about some of the things that seniors and experienced volunteers want, flexibility, they want the opportunity for learning, and they want the opportunity for social capital, and they want the opportunity for intergenerational engagement, and all sorts of different dimensions. The vernacular question, volunteering and service doesn't appeal to young people either, and young people also feel that they are underutilized assets, and that we should look at them as assets. So there's an interesting kind of way in which the work that's being done here is actually lifting up the larger sector conversations and can lead us into, I think, a much more robust and terrific set of possibilities for engaging more people across the board. So that's one message. I think the other message I would say is that as we think about what's necessary for us to move forward, I think that the idea of infrastructure, investment, and inspiration seem all to me to be very important dimensions. I think the public policy dimension is also it's not an I, but it fits in there, because I think it's also about to this broader concept of how do we reimagine our engagement with this third age. But I think, that this idea, again, and this is where I think the commonalities are, the investment and making the activation work at a local level is huge. I represent an organization that has 370 volunteer centers, hands-on action centers across the country. And so, these are natural receptacles for, and centers and hubs for people to be engaged. But we need to expand their capacity and their ability to enable partnerships with other organizations, and equipping the larger nonprofit sector to really take full advantage of the assets that are brought through this generation of volunteers. And finally, I think that there's just the cultural dimension, which I would sort of equate also with the inspiration. I think that John Gompertz and Civic Ventures and Experience Corps has done a phenomenal job of actually, looking at programs that are great models, but also helping shift the cultural expectation of engagement. And so, and that really is about changing the story of what it means to be over 50 in our communities, and what the possibilities are and what the expectations might be. So in that vein, and as the last panelist, I'll just close with a short story. I get to meet a lot of volunteers in my work, and it's one of the great rewards of doing this work. And this past year, one of my favorite stories is from a woman named Edith Harvey, who happens to be from my home state in Georgia. And she was honored this year at our Points of Light conference in June with a Points of Light award, and she was the Georgia Volunteer of the Year. And she's 93 years old. She's been volunteering for 29 years. She has served, she's been serving seniors. She's been preparing meals for seniors And she has prepared over 1 million meals for her fellow seniors, 17,000 hours of service. And in addition to all of that, in the kitchen where she works to prepare, she works with inmates, young men mainly. So she has mentored 100 young men. And in her words, when I talked to her, she told me that she didn't, as far as she knew, that none of them had gone bad. I think that's an extraordinary record. And on top of that, she raised 17 children. So when you think about that kind of experience and that kind of real capacity to give back, and you multiply it by the millions of others like Edith, I just think it's a really inspirational a touchstone for us to ground the larger conversation in that very particular individual story. And I think, again, telling those stories is an important part of shifting the cultural expectation. Thanks.
As I listen to our panelists, a question arises that you all touched on in one way or another, and that is that the 50-plus generation of today is not your grandma's 50-plus generation. They're better educated. They are more expecting to, as Tom said, create the good rather than simply show up and be told what to do. How is that changing both the nature of the way you handle your volunteers, the way you recruit them, and the difficulty that you might have in having too many generals in terms of slotting for volunteer jobs? There aren't that many willing to simply say, tell me what to do. Michelle, how does it affect your organization?
Well, I think, again, as we talk about reinvention of the larger set of possibilities that are available to people, I think we are going to have to reinvent how we engage people. And I do think people are looking for different ways of applying their skills and their unique experience, and they want something that's meaningful and tangible. And so I think one challenge that we should all think about is, we also, I think, are not going to, even with the kind of investment that we're talking about in the Kennedy Hatch bill, we're not going to be able to build the kind of infrastructure that would really enable us to fully mobilize all of the potential. So I think we need to think about, how do we enable people to self-organize? How do we equip people so that they can be civic entrepreneurs and they can lead others in service? And I think, key to this expansion is going to be calling upon the experience of citizen leaders who will lead others, and we will not be able to do the full kind of revolution, I think, without really tapping into the leadership of elders and also young people, frankly, to lead us in unique service projects.
Gura?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that one of the things that it suggests is that there's a higher level of skills and sophistication out there that needs to be matched to the tasks that are appropriate. So I'll use an example from my former life at the Open Society Institute when I said we didn't use volunteers much at Atlantic. In fact, at OSI, we had a retired head of a business in Missouri who moved to New York to live part-time. His kids were living here, and his wife and he bought an apartment in New York, and he came to me and he said, I knew him from a previous board we'd served on together. He knew a lot about nonprofit boards and about organizational management, lived all his life in the private sector. Could he be helpful to our grantees? And I said, he wanted $1 a year or something in an office. And I said, yeah, we gave him a couple. Actually, Susan Tucker, who used to be my colleague, is sitting out there and knows who I'm talking about. And we matched him up with 8, 10, 12, 15 grantees, all of whom came to benefit greatly from his work. He had an enormous amount to contribute to their fiscal management, board development, all those kinds of things. So it requires a much more sophisticated approach to utilizing the skills that people have.
I just add my example of our tax counseling program. The reason that works the way it does is because you have experienced people who can run an organization as volunteers. So a volunteer runs a 5-state territory, has CEO level responsibility for that 5-state territory. So they're bringing that level of experience. And then you combine that with Michelle's comment about self-organizing. We're calling it self-directed, that people are really saying, this is what I want to see happen in my community. AARP, can you give me the tools? Can you give me information? Then I'm going to go do it. I'm going to make it happen. I think we as organizations have to be open to that and support it.
John?
Mr. Chairman? You wanna-
Oh, yes.
We've had wonderful presentations on the over 50 constituency in the United States. Sorry, we've had wonderful presentations, particularly from my organization, the AARP, which is focused on the competency of the over 50 group. We also have to recognize that in America, the richest country in the world, we've talked a lot about the fact that we should be first. We're not first. We're something like 13th in longevity. There are all the European countries now, including the ones that were poor. We used to think of them as poor, are now no longer poor. They have the euro, Portugal, Spain, and so on and so forth. They live on average at least 3 years longer than Americans. There are a lot of folks over 50 who need help. And when we're thinking about the over 50 providing help, the AARP has been terrific in focusing on the fact that people need housing and health care. We need to also look at the structural issues because, the Japanese are living 5 years longer now. They were way behind, they've caught up, and they've surpassed us. We should be first. And I propose we have an Olympics, an international Olympics on which country is first in longevity and healthcare and so forth. Thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to say something about needs. My name is Jerry Shapiro, and I'm Senator Clinton's Westchester Regional Director. At this current time, oh, by the way, I've been a member of ARP for 17 years. At this current time, 9 out of the 10 calls that are coming to my office have to do with the economy. Within that population, it's diverse, from age to ethnic groups or whatever. The group that's having the most difficult time are the seniors who are calling our office with the changing economy. There are people who their economics are changing, they're changing quickly, they're changing drastically. They are seeking from us, where do they go to? I appreciate about what ARP is doing with the tax relief, but there are people who thought they had this amount of money who are now finding out they have currently much less amount of money. And they are really, out of all the groups that I deal with, and as I said, 9 out of the 10 calls that are coming in are about the economy, it is the seniors that are overwhelmed, do not know what to do. Some are embarrassed to go to their children to say, I had a woman yesterday who called me up who was embarrassed to go to her children because she lost so much money in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and is really in desperate straits. So, you have these specialists, these volunteers who have special skills, and how do we match them, particularly in the economic field, to people who, right now, I think we could get to an epidemic situation here.
Let me ask this general question. Is there in your communities, in the infrastructure, is there a way you can respond quickly to changing economic or cultural conditions? For example, I know AARP as an organization sent hundreds of people down to New Orleans, as did other organizations, of course. That was an emergency effort that was quickly put together. Since the financial situation has changed, how flexible are your organizations now to use 50+ and other volunteers to respond to the situation of foreclosure and all the rest? Tom?
Well, I guess I'd make 2 quick comments. One is really to combine both of these comments from the audience. Clearly, we need to move on 2 fronts. There are huge challenges in terms of healthcare in this country and economic security for the second half of life. We, together with a number of other organizations, through an effort that we're calling Divided We Fail, are really trying to bring about change in terms of public policy and what is healthcare in this country going to look like, because the gentleman's absolutely right. We've got the highest per capita expenditure, and we're not getting the return on those dollars, because at best, we're fair to Midland, and sometimes below fair to Midland. So that's one part of where we need to work. But then the other is, what you're raising, is how can we help people, give them information, provide services? Our tax counseling program is one example. There's other work that we do in helping people understand about public benefits that they're eligible for. Another example is in the recent stimulus package is really having volunteers and working with community organizations to get the word out to make sure that people applied for that stimulus check. So that's what we all together need to be tackling. I think both those fronts, programmatically and public policy.
I need a geek squad.
Yeah. Gara?
Well, I guess I was just simply going to say that I entirely agree, of course, with the burden of the last couple of comments, and Atlantic, indeed, as a foundation, is concerned about that the other piece of it as well, even within the aging program. I'm not here to say being an older adult is just a land of milk and honey, and it's all about service and opportunity. There's also need and frailty and healthcare system needs and economic insecurity, and that's a very urgent agenda too. I think where these two things come together, and as if I heard Michelle and Tom accurately, that service kind of as such, or volunteerism as such, doesn't necessarily grab people. Most people are looking to change something or do something or meet a need in their society. That's what, I mean, if you just look into yourself, you say what motivates you is not some abstract concept that I should be volunteering. It's that I want to solve this problem with the schools, this problem with my neighborhood, this civil rights problem, whatever it may be. And so what really comes together here is the kind of matching of this enormous capacity on the part of many millions of citizens, including many older adults who haven't been thought of in that way. And Tom's quite right. You know, we have a long way to go on that, with the urgent needs that we all recognize are present there. It's the matching of those two things that I think, we're not sitting here pretending that there is an growing and epidemic economic insecurity and healthcare problems there are. How can older adults, among many millions of other citizens, besides voting, by the way, which is also a way to address some of these problems, how can they be turned to meet these challenges?
John?
I would just add, I think we have huge needs in various sectors of our economy, including the federal sector. The federal government will lose over the next 5 years a third of its workforce in mission-critical functions that none of us in our room, when we would learn about them, would want to go unfilled. And I think we tend to think in terms of replacing those people with the young. And I wonder if we can think more creatively about in an encore career, as Mark Friedman has so eloquently discussed in his book. And there's a list, a wonderful list. We didn't get into it in our report because we were focused on volunteering. But I'd love to see an agenda around reform that relates to Social Security and health insurance and pension and all the things he suggests in his wonderful book, Encore, that I think would open up all sorts of opportunities in the economy in terms of how we view culturally older Americans with skills, and then concretely move them into the federal government, into teacher workforce shortages. I know the Encore, I think it is, teacher program with Sherry Lansing and Governor Schwarzenegger, 30,000 math and science teachers. Imagine Francis Collins. It's a dramatic example, but people like him going into classrooms and teaching math and science and awakening in young children a love of STEM in a way that could be connected to a national agenda. I say one other thing, which is I think we could do a better job in the country in cataloging needs that older Americans could meet. The high school dropout epidemic. I know we learned from our report that most volunteer service is local. People aren't necessarily going to respond to a national movement. However, we also found that if people learn about concrete needs to meet real needs in their community, one person in our focus group said, you take people over 50 and you match them with aimless and truant youth, building on Pete's good point, the youth won't be truant any longer. We have 1 million kids dropping out of high school in this country. Imagine, 1 million plus 50 adult mentors and tutors and adult advocates entering their lives. It could have a transformative effect. And so I think cataloging those needs and then opening up culturally access to older Americans who could help meet those needs would be a big positive shift.
Pete?
I want to say something about the economics, and I think it's important with, especially the AARP can take a role in public policy in developing information for seniors beforehand, and working through people like Senator Clinton about developing programs that increase the savings, increase the way that people save money, and have those encouragements from the federal level, so people will diversify. When they started talking about putting Social Security in changing it, can you imagine where Social Security would be right now? Would all be looking for a job right now. And I think what needs to happen is from the federal level and from the national intermediaries that represent seniors, there has to be some advocacy about how And what are some of the other ways that seniors can save? Annuities, I mean, there's a variety of different, everybody can't just have a 401k or Social Security. You're gonna have to have a structure of a variety of different ways to save for emergencies. And these economic downturns are gonna occur every so often, and they do. And we need to be proactive in that area.
I pointed out in the introduction a mystery, which I hope you can answer for me. And that is, you've all referred to this vast army of volunteers ready and willing to act, and yet 70% of them say they have not been contacted. Is this because your organizations aren't asking them? Or is there some other barrier? Are we at an aha moment where nobody's even thought that somebody over 50 could volunteer and be worthwhile? Why is that 70% not being asked?
You got a lot of comments out in the audience as well.
Yeah, we've got answers in the audience.
Answers, I hope?
That's great.
This lady first.
Yeah.
I have an observation, and I think it in part maybe gets to your question too from Senator Clinton's office, but you know, one of the things I think all of us have to deal with is how do we get all this vast wealth of information we have out there to people so that they know about it? And also, how do we make the ask? Because that is a huge problem. People are not being asked to volunteer even when they want to. And in part, I think it depends hugely on how we can get moving forward in a much faster way on the digital front. For example, I'm a volunteer with AARP. We have a huge money management program that's run out of our foundation that might be of some assistance to this lady that you talked about. And we are working as fast as we can. We're dancing as fast as we can on the digital front. Frankly, I think we ought to hire a few 19-year-olds and get them to do decent websites for us, because if you look at a lot of these organizations, which I do as a volunteer because of the kinds of things that I get asked and also my own personal interest, it is very difficult to navigate a lot of these informational websites. So that, for example, in Senator Clinton's office, when you have this woman, you need that information quickly. You need to be able to go to some website, AARP's, for example, and find the resources that might be able to deal with that. And I really think we have got a huge problem in front of us of how to take all of this great information and resource and how to ask all of these people to join this call to action for civic engagement and get that out there.
Yes, sir.
A senior Google.
Yeah.
With the National Council on Aging, I'd like to make 2 points that I think have been alluded to. But first of all, I think we have this false dichotomy between aging as a problem, all the challenges we talked about, and aging as an asset. Older people are the solution to the challenges and the problem of an aging society. Older people, we aren't doing very well in the healthcare. 90% of healthcare costs are chronic care. 70% of the underlying risk factors are behavioral. If people will get involved, older people can help address healthcare costs. Most of the volunteering that needs to be done can be done by older people. The political solutions are also older people. So let's realize that we, the older people, are the solution to the challenges of an aging society. In answer to your specific question, why aren't they asked, is because I think, frankly, with all due respect, we're working on the easier half of the problem to solve. Recruiting people, inspiring them to come into this isn't the problem. The wisdom of experience shows that there have been some tremendous crash and burns in this area. $100 million investments in volunteer programs, funding 2,000 programs, of which there are 200 left. Why? A very simple reason. Nobody is funding volunteer coordinators. We all make this very complex, and it's really very simple. If we can't figure out how volunteer coordinators can recruit people and be effective, but the fundamental issue is one of financing and business case and know-how, and I think we just have to put that right at the front, because otherwise we will have 10 more spectacular crash and burns in the next 10 years. I think that's the wisdom of experience.
John?
Hearing the voice of experience. In 2003, we were guided by Michelle Nunn and others working in these areas. We did a study with the Urban Institute which showed that 96% of nonprofit organizations believe that volunteers were absolutely critical to meeting their core missions, and yet only 26% actually invested in volunteer management and coordination. And I think the good news is one of the provisions in the Kennedy-Hatch legislation I'm most excited about is the Volunteer Generation Fund, which will be at first a $100 million investment in investing in your volunteer managers and coordinators and others. The other thing, a finding in our study was that when we asked the vehicle through which older Americans, 50-plus Americans, were serving, they identified, and this is consistent with the census, faith-based institutions. And I think as much as 50-plus Americans are overlooked in the calls to service and the culture of service, I actually think that the faith-based institutions are as well. And I think, especially with some of the minority populations, in terms of language, they're volunteering, we think, in higher numbers. But they're not speaking and Tess is shaking her head because she sees this through the Senior Corps programs, they're not speaking in a language where we can actually capture their activity. Final point, John Gompertz put me on to the point that the second barrier after perception of lack of time was the need to make money, getting back to, is it Senator Collins or Clinton's office? And so John and Experience Corps has come up with, I think, a very deft way to provide stipends and then education awards that ought to be transferable that will enable people to serve and flexible from 3 to 40 hours a week in a way that has real impact in meeting needs, which the 50-plus population very much wants as well, is to see real impact on the ground.
One last question here.
I'm director of the Center for Intergenerational Learning at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I have one question and one concern. The concern I have is that 50 plus is a very diverse population. And because it's a very diverse population, I think we have to look at civic engagement and contribution in many ways. And when we talk about volunteering, so often we just talk about volunteering through formal organizations. And I'm very concerned about this. We just did a ethnographic study in immigrant communities, and we need to recognize the unbelievable contributions that people in many communities are making informally. And that when we say create the good is an informal way, the create the good is an informal way, and that we have to create culturally appropriate opportunities along a whole spectrum. My second issue is, Tom, you talk about divided we fail. I've been in this a long time, and I'm working the youth service and 50-plus civic engagement. I feel like they're parallel tracks. That 50-plus civic engagement people are working together, moving on 50-plus civic engagement. Youth service and national service seem to be over here. This is a great opportunity and a beginning to bring people together, but I wonder if you could address how concretely these movements, fields, energies come together at both the national level and at the local level to make sure that, in fact, divided we fail to create a nation of service.
That's a great place, and it may be a great ending point, because I think two quick comments by way of example. One, I think the fact that we are all here together at this meeting is good concrete evidence of coming together. And second, on the public policy realm, I think another good concrete evidence is that AARP, for example, representing the older population, was in there working hour after hour tirelessly on the Children's State Health Insurance Program and trying to get that signed into law. And for me, that's a powerful example of how it's not just about the older members of ARP. They've got children and grandchildren they care deeply about. We need to be standing there as well. So that would be my concrete example.
Our panel members have been Tom Nelson of AARP, Michelle Nunn of Points of Light Institute and Hands-On Network, Carol LaMarche of Atlantic Philanthropies, Pete Garcia of the Victoria Foundation, and John Bridgeland of Civic Enterprises. It's been my impression over the years that every panel that answers all questions is very unsuccessful because you forget the answers. A panel like this one, though, that has stirred so many questions has to be rated a success, and I hope you thank them for it.